Hey everybody, today I'm going to talk about another 10 games that have left my collection, and I'm going to explain the reasons for that. So the first game I'm going to talk about is Munchkin Marvel. So Munchkin is generally a game that a lot of players get into when they first start to get their toe into the hobby. It's a race to get to level 10 game as you are equipping your character with different items, trying to fight monsters. I must admit it's a kind of game that I would not really consider playing anymore. It's very random, it's got a lot of take that into it, and it has a horrible kind of bash the leader style mechanism where whoever's running away with it just gets absolutely pounded by the other players until somebody else wins. And I don't really like these kind of random, take that in your face, just very brazen style games, and I just don't enjoy that style of gameplay anymore. This one was a lot better than your normal Munchkin style game because not only did it look a lot nicer with the Marvel artwork, this one had some quite interesting elements added in, such as locations and quite interesting character abilities as well. But at the end of the day, it was still Munchkin, still a random mess, and I just don't enjoy the game at all, so hence why it's not staying in the collection, and I'll never be looking to play that one again. Next up, I have Ninja Camp. Now, Ninja Camp is a pretty simple filler-style game as you have this big map of these cards, and you're playing cards as well to move your player tokens around, jumping from card to card, moving in different ways, and collecting them to get victory points, and also collecting them to kind of determine which future moves you can take. There are a lot of these style games out there, almost abstract in its feel, as you're mapping out your moves, trying to grab cards before other players do. And ultimately, it was just a bit too generic, a bit too simple, and was a bit of a flat line for me, and it wasn't fun. So that's why Ninja Camp was not a keeper. The next game I'm going to talk about is Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame is from one of my favourite board game designers, Stefan Feld, and very, very rare that I'll get rid of a Stefan Feld game, only a couple I've done in the past. This one is on the lighter end of the scale of his kind of games. It's a card drafting game that actually scales pretty well, so I find that a lot of card drafting games don't work at lower play counts. It was good. This game was a game I played a lot in a short time frame. And there are a few different strategies and things you can go down. You're trying to collect points. You're trying to control the cathedral. You're trying to fight off these rats that are kind of disease, well, I suppose spreading disease in your city. Has a lot of the Stefan Feld tropes that you tend to like, and I really did enjoy the way that you could compound your actions in this game, where if you go to the same spot again and again and again, you'd get enhanced versions of that action. But ultimately, there was quite a limited things that you could try in this game. As I mentioned before, it certainly is an intro level Euro game, and those style of games I find a bit of a struggle to get to the table now because naturally very casual players aren't interested in playing a game that looks this bland and has this dull of a theme, and kind of more heavier, more involved Euro gamers want to play something a bit more complex. So for that reason, it found a bit of difficulty to find a niche on my shelf. I enjoyed my time with it. It's still something I'd recommend as an entry-level kind of Euro-style game, and a solid card drafting game as well that I really enjoy, but not quite strong enough to stay in my collection. The next game I'm going to talk about is Onitama. Now, Onitama is widely regarded as one of the best and one of the purest abstract, or at least modern abstract games. Almost chess-like in its feel and approach, as you have this grid and you have a bunch of player pieces, one being your sensei, I suppose, or your master, the other ones being this kind of assistants, and you're playing cards to move around this map, trying to capture other people and trying to get your master onto the throne of the other player. This one is so elegant the way it plays, as you have a couple of cards which kind of dictates the movements you can take, but when you use that action, you are going to give it to your opponent. Or at least it'll go to a middle area, so when your opponent plays his next card, then the other player would get the card that you've just played. So it has this almost clockwork feel to it, where as you're playing cards, you've got to bear in mind that your opponent will be using it against you in a couple of turns. It's hard to criticise this game because it does what it does so well. This is more of a personal thing where I went through a bit of a phase, probably the last 3-4 years, where abstract games really haven't appealed to me. I found the luster of them has really worn off, and it's not something I'm attracted to playing. Now that is starting to wane a bit, and I'm starting to dip my toe into more abstract games again and starting to enjoy them again a bit more. But I still feel like I've had my time with this one. I did play it, a good amount of times. Tried all the different abilities, and it's still a game I would suggest people to check out, especially if you do like your abstracts. And as a kind of intermediary, or kind of an intermediate style game to build a bridge towards playing something like chess, because this one is a lot more contained and it doesn't have all the millions of variables that chess does. It just has a few variables that still has a tactical approach but still has a good degree of strategy, but ultimately not something I'd want to play. So that is Onitama. The next game is a difficult one to talk about because this is a game I still strongly recommend. It's from some of my favourite designers. This is Palaces of Carrara by Kramer and Kiesling. Now, the Palaces of Carrara is a weird game, quite a unique game, because a bit like Notre Dame, this one is relatively simple to explain, but it has some depth there as well. And the scoring and feel of this one is a bit different to your standard Euro, as the players really do dictate the pace of this game. So in this game, you're basically collecting marble on this wheel system, where the longer you wait, things get cheaper and cheaper, but you've got to bear in mind that they're also getting cheaper for your opponents, so they can get some good bargains before you get a chance to buy them. And then you're building buildings based on the quality of those bricks and putting them in different cities. But the weird thing, on top of all that, the weird thing about this game is that as an action, you can choose to score a certain city, which means that that city can no longer be scored by anybody else. So it has this chicken style effect to it, where you want to get the biggest amount of points to it, and you don't want to score too soon, but if you wait too long, then your opponent could score it before you do, leaving you high and dry with nothing to do. So that was quite weird, and sometimes a game could last really quickly because people would score all their tokens very rapidly, and sometimes people will just wait and will go for a different approach. And on top of all that, there is so many different objective and scoring cards to add a ton of replayability to this game, which really do make the game feel so much differently than other games you might play. And mechanically and the fun, everything in this game is something I can't really criticise. I think it's such a strong design, it's a unique design, and something that I feel that should be a lot more universally played and praised. And a bit like Notre Dame, this game struggled to find its place on my shelf, because if I wanted to play something introductory, then this has a bit too much going on to it. It's a bit weird, a bit more nebulous than your average game. Whereas if I have the time to explain it and to fully, play it with somebody else, then I would probably rather play something a bit heavier. So for that reason, I didn't really have the group to play it with and to fully get the maximum amount of potential with this one. And, because it's so rare as well, I thought, it might be worth just cashing in and getting a bit of funds to buy other games. So it was with a heavy heart that this game left my collection, and it still holds my shield of quality, still is on my top 50 games of all time, and, it just didn't have its place on my personal shelf anymore. That is the Palaces of Carrara. The next game I'm going to talk about is massive. This one is Pandemic, the base game. So Pandemic, one of the most successful and popular board games of the modern era, a cooperative game as you're trying to traverse the globe, trying to basically stop a global pandemic, trying to eradicate these diseases, and use your player abilities by taking actions to clear up the diseases, to travel around, to try and collect the antidote. And it's a modern classic. If you're watching this video, you probably almost definitely played Pandemic, and I still think it is a strong cornerstone and a great example of what cooperative games can do. A lot of games share the DNA of Pandemic. I kind of ran my course with Pandemic. I played it quite a few times again. It sort of became a go-to game for me, and when that happens, I find I get very fatigued with games. I get bored of things very quickly if I'm to play them in quick succession. I like variety, and it just ran its course with me. I don't really have the incentive or desire to play Pandemic again, or even play a kind of a variation of Pandemic. I like something a bit more involved and a bit different, because I find that a lot of games are just too busy stealing from Pandemic and have too much of a similar feel. The next game I'm going to talk about is another Kramer and Kiesling game. This is Paris. Now, Paris is a game that I still rate highly. It still holds my shield of quality. It did very well at my last year's top 50. It's a beautiful looking game as you're trying to fight for control or jockey for position by having the majorities in these different sectors in Paris, by placing these keys and jumping from building to building, trying to get those higher values and score the most points. And it also has this pretty interesting score track as you are balancing not only controlling things, but also how far you're going to move your token. And collect these different bonuses, but as you travel further down this track, you can't go back on yourself, and you can have some really cool synergies and different combos and things that you can mix both the area control and that time track with. And I thought these two things independently meshed together wonderfully, almost seamlessly. Designed this game. It's so smooth, so elegant in the way it works. But I find that I did really enjoy my plays of this one, and it just sat on my shelf after my initial plays, and it really did struggle to fight for its place and struggle to jump out on me to want to play it again. Because if I want to play a time track game, I'll play something like Glenmore. If I wanted to play an area control game, then there's a ton of them out there, including El Grande by the same designers. So another great example of an introductory level Euro game. Again, wonderfully produced, looks great, and still a testament of how great of a designer or designers Kramer and Kiesling are by keep coming out with wonderful games. This one only came out last year, and I knew a new expansion has come out as well. But for me, it just had a bit of a glass ceiling and didn't quite have the depth and the claws to kind of satisfy me. So hence why Paris sadly left my collection. The next game I'm going to talk about is Pirate Fluxx. So a bit like Munchkin, Fluxx, an immensely popular small card game. This one is just wildly random as you're trying to achieve a certain objective by having a number of cards. The game's rules are constantly changing by you're changing how many cards you're drawing, how many cards you're playing. And I just found this game a chaotic mess. No strategy in this game whatsoever, just pure wild randomness. And I found that this game would massively outstay its welcome. Sometimes you'd draw the cards you needed in 5 minutes. Sometimes it would take 40 minutes. And it was just tedious. I hated it. I really, really hate Fluxx. And, for that reason, it's not in the collection. I just don't like it at all. And I rate it very lowly. That is Fluxx. The next game I'm going to talk about is Polynesia. Now, Polynesia is a game I had quite high hopes for. It's another game from 2020. By Pier Sylvester, who famously designed The King is Dead. And I remember playing this one not long after I played The King is Dead, so my expectations were relatively high. This one is an abstract game as you are placing these different, tribal people on these different islands, trying to collect tokens and score majorities, all this kind of thing. And it had a relatively interesting mechanism in this game, which I quite liked, where you would take 3 actions, then you take 2 actions, then you take 1 action. But the order in which you did these things is quite important, and it could really add a lot of decision space into the game. But ultimately, I found the game quite boring. I found it bland. It didn't have anything to excite me. And this was another kind of thing that backed up my idea of not really enjoying abstract games too much. And I just found this game a bit pedestrian. It didn't do anything that a lot of it didn't kind of have its place on the market for me. There's so many abstract games out there and some really good ones, and this one was just not quite up to standard, and which is a bit of a shame. But just not for me really. And I suppose if I'd done a bit more research before playing Polynesia, I probably would have known that, because it's just not my cup of tea. The final game I'm going to talk about on this episode is Pyramids. Now, Pyramids is a small box card game where you are trying to build a pyramid to score points by connecting all the different colours of bricks. You're trying to build an obelisk, and you're also trying to build a crypt by collecting certain types of cards. But the thing I really liked about this game was the action selection mechanism, where you would have these tiles out and you would draft which tile you wanted, which would not only determine the initiative in which you're going to draft the cards you wanted to build your pyramids, etc., but also determine how many actions you can take per turn. So you could either take a bunch of actions but go last in initiative and get last dibs on the cards available, or you could really definitely get the cards you want but only get to take one of the actions. And that added a really compelling mechanism in the game for me. I really did enjoy. This was a big surprise hit for me. a pleasant surprise, as I didn't know anything about this game before playing it. I picked it up on a complete punt and I really enjoyed it. It's one of the best filler games I've played in terms of not knowing much about it, and it just resonated well. It had a nice puzzly aspect to it, and as you were trying to match up all these bricks and trying to collect these big chains as the pyramid is funneling down into its pinnacle. And it just worked for me. I will say it was a bit of a one-trick pony. It didn't have the mileage and the legs that a lot of great filler games do, but this was still a good one, way better than average. And I do think that there's a big market out there who would enjoy Pyramids if they knew about it, because it is relatively unknown and it has kind of flown under the radar a bit more than I would have expected. But really solid filler game, that is Pyramids. That concludes this episode of 10 games that have left my collection. Hopefully you've got a bit of insight here about why these games haven't stuck around. If you have enjoyed the video, please hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos too. For everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.